If you're enjoying the sound of the birds chirping and general outdoorsiness, that's because I'll be recording this one in the garden.
Start taking note.
I know that we've moved to this weird 1 meter plus idea, but essentially 1 meter plus means 2 meters. Social distancing explained, 2 meters for geographers, 1.1 Sir David Attenboroughs. Imagine Sir David Attenborough is lying on the floor for some weird reason in between you and the person you need to stay away from. You need to imagine that you cannot go any closer than the length of Sir David Attenborough on the floor in between you. 2 meters for geographers, 1.1 Sir David Attenboroughs. Link to the Do Now quiz is on ePraise or in the description. Pause here and get it done. Answers already on there. So something that just wasn't as good as it should have been on the Do Now quiz, our understanding of this term fetch. Fetch is the distance a wave travels before hitting land. So for the UK, we've got waves which hit us from the west and they travel pretty much the entire distance of the Atlantic Ocean, building up over that distance. They've got a very large fetch and therefore when they hit land they've got more energy and are more destructive. However, in the east of the UK, our waves travel a much shorter distance across the North Sea. Their fetch is much shorter, therefore they're smaller, they're less powerful. So fetch is the distance a wave travels before hitting land. The larger the fetch, the more powerful the wave. Another thing that in the Do Now quiz we weren't great at, I described verbally a levee and asked you to identify what it was. A levee is a raised bank either side of the river caused by deposition during flooding. Now, there's an image showing the river, the levee, the raised bank next to the river, and then the wide flat floodplain next to that. What I'd like to do is just quickly go through levee formation as a recap for you. So, with levees, we've got our river, we've got the channel here, and for levees to form there needs to be flooding. At the point at which the river floods, the water either side of the channel is much shallower, so therefore there's more friction with the land either side of the channel, and that means deposition starts to occur right next to the channel, and that's because the water is slowed down due to that friction. That deposition means that very large rocks and boulders or larger material is deposited right next to the river channel, and then smaller material is deposited further and further away because it can be carried further because the river's just about got enough energy. But the largest material during a flood is deposited right next to the channel. When that water drains away, what we're left with are these raised banks, as we saw in the photo a moment ago, these raised banks which are levees. The wider, flatter area of deposited material is the floodplain, but the raised banks caused by deposition during flooding are known as levees, something that we need to know. So, exciting times. Moving on to today's work, we're going to look at a couple of very interesting exam questions. Interesting for a few different reasons. First one, explain how a coastline of headlands and bays forms and changes over time. This is a horrendous question, not because it's not good geography. It's beautiful geography, really traditional physical geography, looking at coasts, headlands, bays. There's loads of great geography that we can include. The reason that this is an appalling question is because it is a 4-mark question, which actually, to answer really, really well, you need sort of 6 marks worth of time. You need longer. So this becomes a question that you need to really rush through to get everything in that you know. If we start to break it down, first off, the command word is explain. So we need to sequence our explanation and our sentences correctly to talk about how processes are occurring over time. We need to make sure that they link. So one sentence will then be followed on by another sentence which develops that. So that explanation requires us to develop sentence to sentence to sentence in order to explain the processes that are taking place. Okay, fair enough. We have explained 4 markers. That's fine. Headlands and bays. Okay, that's the bit of geography we need. Again, that's fine. If we had explain how headlands and bays form, we're not unhappy with that. Forms, yep, cool. So how do headlands and bays form? That's perfectly fine, and that would be a typical 4 marker. The reason we don't like this is to get 4 marks. The question's asking how do headlands and bays form, and how do they change over time, meaning we need to add additional detail, which means that this really starts to put pressure on for getting it completed to a good standard in 4 minutes. Now, in order to do it, I would recommend that you explain how headlands and bays form, and then you would take the headland and explain briefly, and it does have to be brief because of how much time we've got, explain briefly how a headland then changes over time after the headland and bay has formed. If we take a look at some of the key terms to include, I would suggest discordant in relation to the coastline that headlands and bays form at. I would suggest we need to mention hydraulic action and abrasion because we're talking about landforms of erosion here, headlands and bays. I think we need to use the key term resistant because that's essential when talking about how discordant coastlines result in headlands and bays. And then for that second part, that changes over time, I think we need to consider mentioning cave, arch, stack, stump. Those landforms of erosion are created in headlands over time as the headland is attacked by the waves on both sides due to it being exposed, jutting out into the sea. What I'd like you to do now is to pause and have a go at that answer. I'll put a Microsoft Forms up so that you could do a typed answer or do a paper copy. If you do a paper copy, make sure to take a photo of it and email it to me so I can have a look at your answers ready for feedback for next week. So here we have a model answer to look at and to compare with what you've written. You'll see it looks like a 6 marker. It's got 2 paragraphs. There's a significant level of detail here. That's the real concern I have with this question, which is taken from an exam from I think 2 years ago now, so something fairly recent. It's the amount that they're asking you to cover in that 4-minute time. Now I timed myself while I was producing this and I was able to produce it in less than 4 minutes, but the knowledge and the ability to explain that knowledge is something that I've been working on for years and years and years and years. However, that is just what you need to aim for. You need to be able to hopefully explain the answer to this question, the formation of headlands and bays and how the headland changes over time. You need to be able to explain that as well as I can, as a geography teacher can, because we're aiming for perfection. So I'll read it through for you, compared to yours, and make any improvements you need to in green. Headlands and bays are formed at discordant coastlines where bands of more resistant and less resistant rock have formed perpendicular to the sea. Erosion due to hydraulic action and abrasion erodes the soft, less resistant rock quickly, retreating to create a bay, whilst the more resistant rock is left jutting out to sea, forming a headland. Over time, deposition in the sheltered bay forms beaches, whilst the headland is now exposed to erosion on both sides. As a result, faults become deeper to create caves, and caves are eroded through the headland to create arches. Arches collapse when they become too wide, leaving a tall column of rock known as a stack, which may itself collapse to form a stump. Second question we're looking at today is a far better question. A 6 marker, a genuine 6 marker, one that if you pay close attention to it, if you don't make any elementary mistakes, then you should be able to put together a really strong answer, well structured, with lots of excellent detailed geography, at which point you're hitting level 3. Using figure 12 and your own knowledge, explain how different landforms may be created by the transport and deposition of sediment along the coast. So first off, key things we need to do. We need to use figure 12. Figure 12 is there, it's a map. We need to make specific reference to figure 12 in order to access good marks. In order to make use of figure 12, there are certain landforms that are obvious on figure 12. Landforms of deposition we can see because the key shows us sediment. In order to identify them, we need to use our compass directions. So we could talk about the spit in the northeast of the map, the bar in the north of the map, the beach slightly to the west of the map. So compass directions help us to be explicit when referring to the figure. We need to use our own knowledge, but if we know that they are spits, they are bars, they are lagoons, they are beaches, if we know those things, if we know that the processes we're going to talk about are longshore drift and deposition, then that's your own knowledge, so that's fine. That enables you to access those level 3 marks that we're after. You need to explain. Explanation when we're talking about physical processes means that we need to absolutely nail our understanding of sequence, and we explain those processes in the correct sequence with no major gaps and with everything in the correct order. That's what explanation is asking us to do here, because we're talking about the process that creates these landforms. Landforms plural. That's the key here. It's a 6 marker and it's talking about different landforms. If we only refer to one, then we are not going to be able to access level 3 marks. It is landforms plural, so we need to refer to 2. We need to be able to talk about transport, and in this case we can see that they're very kindly labelled an arrow with the direction of prevailing wind. Brilliant. If we're looking at direction of prevailing wind and landforms of deposition, we know that transport is talking about longshore drift, and we need to refer to deposition. Well, these are landforms of deposition, so anyone who's not explaining the formation with reference to deposition has not been paying attention, so that's something we need to make sure we're able to do. Guys, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, geez, this is blowing my mind, you go back to previous videos, find the explanation for the formation of spits, the formation of bars, longshore drift, and re-watch, because that hopefully will give you a better understanding and ability to have a go at this question. So key terms we need to include. It's asking us about transport, so we need to talk about longshore drift. It's asking us about landforms of deposition, so we need to talk about the process of deposition and why it may occur in these cases. You probably want to be talking about changes in the shape of coastline and the movement or the carrying of material into deeper water when talking about deposition here. And I would suggest we want to do a paragraph on the formation of spits. I would suggest we want to do a paragraph on the formation of a bar and a lagoon. However, you may choose to do a paragraph on the formation of a beach. I've not done that in the model answer, but I will talk you through what that paragraph might look like if you choose to do it. So pause here, 6 minutes, see if you can get a decent answer together, and then we'll have a look at what a model would look like once you've had a go. Again, I'll make sure that there's a Microsoft Forms option if you would rather type this. If you want to handwrite it, that's fine, but do make sure you're emailing me these answers so that I can be including key points from your work in the feedback. So here's your model answer, 6 marker. So 2 paragraphs, a 6 mark explain question, so it doesn't need a conclusion, and that's something that we do need to remember. Probably should have mentioned that earlier, not to worry. We've gone for the spits in the southwest and the northeast of the map for the first paragraph, and we've explained how spits form, and then we've gone for the bar and the lagoon in the north of the map for the second paragraph, and we've referred to transport and deposition in both to explain how they've been performed. Now, you may have included a beach, and if you included a beach as one of your paragraphs, that's fine. If you included a beach, your paragraph would talk about how the sheltered bay seen on the figure means that as longshore drift occurs, deposition is likely to build up within that sheltered bay, resulting in a beach. And you might mention briefly that if it was a predominantly pebble material, it would be a narrower, steeper shingle beach, whereas if it was lighter sand material, finer sand material, then it would create a wider, more gently sloping sand beach. Here though, we've gone for spits and we've gone for the bar as our two paragraphs. I'll read it out and then I'll pick out some of those key things that we need to make sure we include. The figure shows spits have formed in the southwest and northeast of the map. As prevailing wind is from the southwest, longshore drift has occurred, carrying material along the coast from west to east due to the angle of the swash. Where the coastline changes shape, this material is carried into deeper water and is deposited on the sea floor. This process repeats, building up sediment until new land is created. This is known as a spit. The figure also shows a bar and lagoon in the north of the map. Where there is a bay, the coastline changes shape, with longshore drift and deposition causing a spit to form, in this case from west to east. Over time, as the spit grows, it eventually reaches the opposite side of the bay, where it then becomes a bar, with the body of water now separate from the sea, known as a lagoon. The reasons that these are good paragraphs. Number one, they're in a good order. They're well sequenced with everything neatly following on. Number two, there's lots of key terms used accurately. Just skimming through the first paragraph, for example, prevailing wind is mentioned, longshore drift is mentioned, swash is mentioned, coastline is mentioned, deposition is mentioned, sediment is mentioned, spit is mentioned. The accurate use of those key terms in the correct order with sentences which follow on from each other to explain the process that is occurring, that's what's going to enable you to hit level 3. You'll notice as well that in that first paragraph I've used the sentence that Emily included in her diagrams from last Thursday. This process repeats, which is a brilliant, short, easy phrase to use to show that something needs to happen again and again and again in order to create this landform. The process is a repetitive process. Have a read, pause, have a read through, compare that to what you've got. If what you've got is something approaching this, brilliant. If what you've got needs a little bit of work, use your green pen to make those improvements. If you've done that and you've done it on paper, please make sure you take a photo of it and email it to me, because I do want to be seeing your work and using it to contribute to the feedback. So homework questions, knowledge organisers are as an attachment on ePraise. Get them done, because this is really good consolidation for the work that you're doing in the online video lessons.